Hey there, it's Dr. Guerrero. I'm going to start working through chapter one, our first lecture. So I'm going to break it up into small segments so they're not such long videos. We're going to start at the beginning. So the introduction to biological concepts. Basically, in this series for chapter one, we're going to talk about all the topics that we'll cover in depth as we go throughout the term. We will also discuss at the very end biological research. So it starts off with you're in biology. So what is biology? The goal is that you know, or you now know, that ology means the study of, and bio is life. So biology is the study of life. In this class, because we study all life, that includes prokaryotes, so bacteria, protists, fungi, plants, and animals. So all things living, not just humans, but giraffes, plants, mushrooms, amoeba, and then, of course, what most people call germs. So there's a lot that we're going to cover. All living organisms or all living systems have to have 7 characteristics in order to be considered a living organism or a living system in that. The first is that they are organized in a hierarchy. And in this segment, I'm just going to basically briefly cover them, and then I go into each one in a little bit more detail in another segment. So they're organized in a hierarchy so that each level has emergent properties. What this looks like is a cell, which is the smallest unit of life, then a group of cells. A cell by itself can do one function, but a group of similar cells doing the same function is called a tissue. And that tissue functions more to do more than just the cell itself. When we put a bunch of tissues, same tissues together, carrying out a similar function, they form an organ. So the organ requires the tissues and cells. And in order for the cells and tissues to function as an organ, they have to work together. So and the thought or the concept behind an emergent property is that one thing by itself can carry out a task, but it takes multiple working together to do something bigger. Okay, so that's what we reference kind of emergent properties, and I'll go into that in more detail later. Second characteristic is that they contain chemical instructions. So this is kind of confusing for students because they're like chemical instructions, but this is basically DNA. And I want to give you some other terms for DNA. So DNA is sometimes referred to as your genes or your genetic code or the genome, but all of that is DNA. Okay, so students tend to get stumped or confused if a question asks something about a gene and they only know it in reference to DNA. Okay, and again, I'll go into that in a little bit more detail later. The third characteristic is that living organisms are able to engage in metabolic activities. Most students, when I bring this up, talk about digestion. And that's normal because they're like the digestive system, that's your metabolism. But there is so much more, right? Metabolic metabolism or metabolic activity is nothing more than a chemical reaction. And there's 2 types. There's anabolic and catabolic. And we'll go into that in some more detail. The fourth characteristic is that energy can flow through that system, okay? And that it cycles so that it doesn't live forever. Eventually, it will die. So the energy currency that we'll be talking about is ATP, and the cycle would be like the carbon cycle, the nitrogen cycle, basically the circle of life, okay? The fifth characteristic is that these organisms are able to maintain homeostasis. And homeostasis is used when we're talking about a living system, whereas you may have heard the term equilibrium used when we're talking on a non-living situation, like a chemical, a mixture of some sort, but no living aspect. So homeostasis is referencing living, and we talk about the ability to keep an internal body temperature, for example, despite what's happening on the outside. Okay, and we do that through different feedback mechanisms. The sixth characteristic is that these organisms are able to reproduce and develop. I think that most people get that. They're like, okay, you have to have babies or you have to have sex in order to have more of that species. And very much so, that is correct. But babies of any species aren't normally born full grown, right? They're born much smaller and they have to grow or mature into an adult or the adult form of that organism. What is that? What is that type of reproduction? Well, that's cellular reproduction. That's mitosis. Mitosis is why you were born a 7-pound baby and now you're a 150-pound adult. Mitosis. Development is the development not only of the organ systems, okay, but how you continue to develop through time, through cell remodeling. You have to continue to grow. So organisms have to, and even if growing is very small and you can't really tell, there's still growth and development occurring through mitosis. Okay. We talk about mitosis in any type of eukaryotic cell. We use the term binary fission when we refer to a prokaryote, which would be a bacteria. Okay. Also, meiosis is the type of cellular replication or division that takes place in gametes. So this is sperm and egg of humans and of most species. We refer to that as meiosis. The seventh and final characteristic of a living system or organism is that they change from one generation to the next. And this is what leads to evolution. And evolution takes place, like full evolution, over multiple generations, not just from grandparent to parent to child. So that's a really close, a really small generational gap. But over 10 generations, 15, we start to see evidence of evolution, how things change. All right, so this is the intro to chapter 1. We're about to go into each of these characteristics in just a little bit more detail.